Hello, and welcome to Sourdough's Baked Goods. Today we're going to continue our maple syrup crew order. We're going to finish all the pies. We're going to do 2 meat pies, an apple pie, and a blueberry pie. We're going to add in a lemon square as well. And extra for them, I'm going to make an extra attempt on my sourdough so that I get more practice as I go. So let's get into it. We're going to first start by making sure that all our liquid comes out of our berries and our apples. So to do that, we're going to add sugar, salt to our berries and sugar, salt to our apples. What that does is it draws out all the moisture, which we can use to thicken up and put back into the apples or blueberries to make the filling nice and good. So for the blueberry recipe, you gotta taste the berry and decide how sweet it is. I'm going to put about 120 grams of sugar. It will be anywhere between 110 to 150 depending on your blueberries. So always taste to make sure that you know how much you need. And of course just a pinch of salt. All you're going to do is mix it up. And let it sit off to the side and let all the moisture come out of it. Next we're going to do the same thing for our apples, but for the apples what we have to do first is drain all the water obviously, but we gotta slice them up nicely, then add our sugar in. Okay, so now that I drained the water, all I have to do is start cutting them up. What I like to do is, so that you can see, start like this so they get nice long pieces and slowly go upwards so that you start cutting straight up, just like so. Keep going till you're about here, so you get all these nice pieces. Flip it down. Whoa, do the same thing until you're all the way cut through. You got all your pieces. So we're gonna put all the pieces back into here. Then we're gonna add our sugar and our salt. This time we're using brown sugar because brown sugar and cinnamon go really well together, which is perfect for an apple pie. Just so you know, I'm using Granny Smith apples. You can use any apples you like. I think Granny Smiths are the best for apple pies. Okay, so now that I've chopped up all our apples, we're gonna add in our brown sugar and our salt. Just a little bit of salt. Then the brown sugar. Just like with the blueberries, we're gonna mix this all up so that the sugar's everywhere. What sugar does and salt does to any fruit is it draws out moisture. So when you put this stuff in here, all the moisture is gonna start to come out. You can drain that off and then use that to make your sauce, to make your filling. So once this is fully mixed in, all the sugar is going to be touching all the apples and be able to get all the liquid out to be used. I'm doing this first so that I give it the maximum amount of time to get all the moisture out, because I can make my pie, my bread, my lemon squares, and then finish these 2 pies at the very end to make sure that every last drop of liquid is out, because you need every last drop. If you leave it only for a few minutes, all that's going to happen is you're going to get some moisture, and some moisture is going to continue to come out after the fact. And so when you put your sauce back in to mix it all up, it's going to be very runny, and it's not going to do really well in your pie because it's going to drain some of the liquid out of it, and it's going to look ugly. So make sure you leave these for at least minimum half an hour to an hour. I prefer to just do these at the beginning, then start on everything else and finish these at the end so that I get maximum amount of time. So let's just finish up mixing them up and we'll start on to our bread. I'm gonna go with bread before anything else because it's sourdough and it's gonna give me 2-hour periods of time to proof, and that gives me plenty of time to get everything else done, and it's gonna be a lot easier that way. So now onto our sourdough. Put your yeast in first, which is your starter. Remember to feed your starter right after using it so that you don't forget and you get this out of the way. You want this to be able to be used continuously. So just remember, equal parts flour and water for whatever you used. So I'm using 160, so 80 flour, 80 water. And of course the water. Just mix this up, pour it back in, and put it wherever you want to put it. If you're going to be making tomorrow, just leave it on the counter. If you're going to be making next week, put it in the fridge or freezer, depending on how long you're gonna need to wait for. If you're gonna be making this in 2 months because you're going on vacation or something, or even a month, you want to make sure this is in the fridge or even the freezer. So let's just pour this back in and continue on. Now with that out of the way, we're gonna just put our flour in with our yeast. Take that off to the side. Put our salt in with a little bit of our water. So we'll add about 100 grams of water to our salt. And then just have the rest of the water. Actually, the rest of the water can just go directly in here so that we don't waste any more dishes. So 100 in here, 130 in here. Okay, so we're just gonna turn this on low. Once it slowly forms together, we'll add in our salt water. Then we'll let it go on a higher speed for about 8 minutes. Now that it's semi-mixed, we'll add in our salt water. Make sure all of it's out. And we'll turn it on again till it forms a dough, and then we'll turn it up, go for 8 minutes. Then we'll let it proof for about 2 hours. Then we'll move on to our meat pies. Okay. 8 minutes is up. This is nice and strong. Should be good to go. I'll just cover it up. And as you can see, we're going to be moving on to our meat pies. Remember with your meat pies that if you're going too slow, your potatoes could brown, and you don't want to be stressing on things. So if you want to go slow and relax, peel your potatoes now, put them in water, then start everything else so that it's all ready to go. But first we're going to put this off to the side and start on our pies. So we're doing 2 pies. So we're obviously going to start with our spices. Make sure that you double your amount. We're going to roast these first. While these are roasting, we'll be chopping up our garlic and our onions. We'll start sweating them after their spices are nice and roasted. Once that's all done, we'll sweat them out. While that's sweating, we'll move on to our other vegetables. Okay, so let's put this off to the side, turn it on, and move on to our garlic and onions. So check if you know how much garlic and onions you need. Just put your stuff in undone and go. With garlic, you'll lose about 10% of the weight. With onions, it's about the same. So I need 10 grams of garlic, so I'm gonna need about 11-12 grams with this stuff on top. It might be a bit more depending on the piece, but it should be generally around 10 to 20% you'll lose from the skins. And take that into consideration while you do this. Done cutting our onions and our garlic, so we're gonna put it into our bowl off to the side here. Let those start sweating while we cut the carrots, celery, and potatoes. Again, remember, you don't need to get all of the things out this round because you are gonna put everything back in here and scrape it off again. Just make sure you get most of it in. This is what it looks like. So I always like to start with celery because you don't have to peel anything, you just have to break off pieces that you need. So, zero this off, and this is all I need because I'm gonna just slightly, so that I can move this so you can see better. So, I am gonna get rid of this piece. A little bit of that piece, but other than that, that's all we're gonna take off, and it should weigh about the right amount. Yep, perfect. So, since this is a big piece, I'm gonna cut right here. I know these pieces are gonna be nice like this, just like so. But all these pieces should probably get cut in half before making those size cuts. Okay, so those are all done. You can weigh off on top of here. You know you're gonna lose a bit. So once I shave off all the skin and chop off the ends, this amount should end up being what I need. So remember that for the carrots, these end pieces need to be cut bigger because they're a lot smaller and you don't want them to cook super quick and be mushy and then the rest be chewy. So then as you get to the end, you start cutting slightly smaller until you get all the way to the end. These should all be enough. And you can hear that the onions are nice and sizzling. So I will start onto my potatoes and we'll come back then. Okay, so these onions and garlic are nicely sweated. So I'll add in my other vegetables. Make sure you get it all out now. Now mix these up a bit. And this is where your recipe comes into hand. When you simmer this, to get to the same consistency or texture for the vegetables, you simmer it for about the same amount of time, no matter how many vegetables. Which means the more milk you put in, the bigger batch you get, the less liquid that's going to evaporate. So what that means is, if I just double the recipe and go to 500 mils, I'm going to have a lot more liquid than in previous recipes when I just did one pie. So I've tested this before and it's okay for 2 pies to just double the recipe, but when you get into the 3 and 4 pies, which I've done also, you need to reduce the milk just a little bit or drain some off at the end, because if you don't, you're gonna have too much liquid in there. It's gonna seep through your dough and it's going to mess up a whole bunch of things or leak out or cause other problems. So make sure you're taking that into consideration when you're making your recipe and when you're baking, because if you're just making 1 pie, it's easy, but if you're making, say, about 4 pies, instead of doing a whole liter of milk, I'd probably do 800 mils or 750 mils, somewhere around that range. So let's add in this milk, let it simmer, add in our bay leaves, make sure we get all this out. But the other issue you'll also find is that if you reduce too much milk, you're not gonna have enough liquid to cover the vegetables, and you do need that to make sure that everything cooks evenly. So you gotta be very careful. If you wanna be safe, you can just keep doubling, tripling the recipe and just drain off a bit more liquid. That's the safer way to do it, but make sure that you do that at least if you're going to just triple the recipe. You can, again, just reduce it, but then you run the risk of making it too dry, so make sure you test this thoroughly before you decide which course of action you're going to do. Make sure your Baileys are under the liquid and make sure they're easy to find so that when you take them out, you don't lose them. Okay, so once this is heated up, which again you can tell by the oil being very runny, I'm going to slap this on like it's a pancake. Flatten it out. You want to hear that sizzle? Just like that. We're going to just flip it, break it apart, fully cook it, make sure it browns on both sides. Season everything, and we'll put it all in one bowl. Okay, so now that the meat and vegetables are done, they're just gonna cool. I'm gonna get started on the lemon squares. The lemon squares are the same temperature as the meat pies, so as this cools, I'll get the lemon squares started. I'll start rolling out the dough for the 2 pies. Once the bottom comes out for the lemon squares, the pies should be able to go in and both can finish together. The lemon squares will obviously come out first, but because they're pies it won't matter so much, so we're gonna quickly get started on that. Mix those all up before putting in your butter. And make sure to get nice chunks to go in. Try to keep the pieces as big as possible. I know if you are super close and you have to just shave off pieces and make them thinner like this, but always try to have bigger chunks so that it's easier to work with and it's easier to not make mistakes. The thinner they are, the easier it is to make mistakes. So we're just going to do rubbing in method. Just keep going till the consistency is nice and mealy. And remember, we're going to put 2/3 on the bottom and 1/3 on top. Okay, now that it's this consistency, nice and mealy, we're going to add 2/3 into here. Two-thirds is about 430, depending on how well you measured out your ingredients. But losing a gram here or there isn't the worst thing, as long as you keep it nice and consistent and be super close to each other on every time you make this. Make sure you level it nicely. We'll put this in, start rolling out our pie dough for our 2 meat pies. Once those are done, this bottom should be done, and we'll put all 3 back in. After that, we'll start working onto our sourdough, get it into the basket so that it can start proofing for its final time before it puts it in the oven. Then we can finish off our 2 other pies. Once those are all done, the bread should be ready, done and proofed, and ready to go in as well. So let's just put this in the oven and move on to our meat pies. Okay, I cut a quarter off to make sure I have enough for the top. Going to just roll these out, put them on top, fill them as quick as possible so that everything times out perfectly. We gotta go fairly quickly because the bottoms of the lemon squares will be out fairly soon. We don't have time to willy-nilly go around doing things. First one done. Roll it up nicely. Lift it up. Start a little bit over so that the thing doesn't move. Roll it off. And then slowly, gently drag it back. Push it into all the sides. And then we can cut. Remember to leave some dough so that you can crimp. leave this extra off to the side. Make sure that this extra doesn't go with this extra, so that you can put this with one top and the extra from this one on one top. Put this off to the side. We'll start on the next one. Okay, number 2 done. I just took out the lemon squares, so we gotta go quick so we get everything back in the oven right away. Drag it back slightly if you went a little bit over. Oh. Lift up so that it doesn't rip. Press it into all corners. Then start cutting. There we go. Number 1 and 2 done. We'll put these together. We'll fill these 2 pies, but first we're gonna go into our lemon squares so that we can put them in quickly and then fill everything in here. Okay, so let's quickly get this done so that we can get it onto our pies. Okay, so let's put this top on. Level it out. Get this in. Our pie should definitely be cool by now. Our filling. We'll put that all in our pies, roll out our tops. And then we'll be done putting all that in, and we'll have plenty of time to finish the prep for the apple pie and the blueberry pie. Okay, so to make sure that it's not too liquidy, and make sure that you put the right amount in each one. You could weigh it out, but this is something that's a lot easier to figure out because it's a pie and you only can put so much in. My recipe should be enough to fill each pie like to the brim. So if I'm overfilling one, I won't be able to, because it should be the perfect amount for the recipe. Make sure you get enough liquid in each one so that you're not putting all liquid in one, because that could ruin that one and not ruin the other one. Get all of it out. Put this off to the side and then start pressing down and checking. So this one looks like it's slightly bigger, so I'll put a little bit over there. But other than that, everything looks good and it fills it perfectly the same amount. Maybe slightly more on this side, but you can easily fix it and see it by eye. You don't need to go by scale. So we're gonna put these off to the side and get working on our tops. We'll quickly start with this one. This one's the bigger one than these because I cut more off on this one, which is this one. So make sure you remember which pie had which piece, so that if you cut a little bit off of one, you're not putting a giant top over one and a tiny thin one over the other one. You want to make sure that this is even. Oh, let's just roll it out. Okay, first top done. Roll it up. Remember, this is going on the bottom because this is where all that extra stuff went. So if we're going to, we don't need to roll it up, it's small enough. Just make sure that one side's on the bottom. Place it on top. Go around the edges just like you did last time. This stuff won't be able to be used, but that's okay. It's gonna be minimal waste, so it's not a big deal. Oh, perfect on that side. So I don't have to cut too much off. There we go. That's one pie done. We gotta work quickly. Once this pie thing is on, the top, is on, it doesn't really matter that you take your time because it's not gonna get any harder to use. But to roll things out, you want to make sure you're using cold dough so that you don't mix the butter in too much. So, off to the next one. Get a little bit of flour down and start rolling it up. Right about here is when I put on this stuff evenly so that it spreads out nicely. Try not to make it so that you are putting dough on either side, because this does look ugly if you don't do this properly. And if you also work it too much, remember you just rolled out that other side. If you keep working it too much, that dough will go really tough and chewy. You don't want that, you want a nice flaky dough. So just keep that in mind when you're rolling this out so you don't mess up anywhere. Second dough done. This is the bad side, so I want to make sure that's on top. Or sorry, yeah, on top of the meat. Roll that out. Start cutting. There you go. Now you do the press on all of them, all the way around. Make sure you get a nice circle so that this part puffs up, makes it look nicer. Okay, so that one's done. Move on to this one. Press all the way around. Before you press all of it, make sure you get your nice circle so that you can blow out all the air. Don't worry if you don't get all the air, you're gonna cut the middle so that you can release some air from there as well. So there we go. Now you crimp the outside. There you go. One pie done. Next pie. There we are. Grab your knife, make your star. Make sure it's all nice the way you want it, so that all of it's going to come out and you can see the star nicely. No point in making the design if you're not going to see it. So all we have to do now is egg wash this and throw her in. Just egg wash these. Make sure that when you put pies on a tray like this, that there's lots of air flow so that these aren't touching as much. There's a lot of air flow through so that it heats everything evenly and everything bakes the same. You don't want your sides baking fully and your middle not, or you don't want these two sides not baking fully and everything else baking fully. Just make sure that everything is nicely placed so that none of those problems happen. Most of that's mitigated with a convection oven, but you always want to be safe because you never know. If your oven breaks mid-bake, you're gonna ruin your pies. Especially if you have a big oven and your thing breaks, it's not gonna be a small deal. Like if my oven fan breaks right now but still cooks it all, I'm only gonna lose 2 pies if I mess up. In a big industrial one, I could lose 50 pies, which 50 pies is a lot more money than just 2 pies. So just be careful for when you're running your own business. Okay, so that's all good. We'll put this in the oven and we'll come back to do our other pies. Okay, so we're gonna start with our apple pie. The reason for this is both the apple pie and the blueberry pie have to start at 400, but the apple pie stays at 400 the entire time. So I'm going to put the apple pie in first, get to the point in time where the blueberry pie needs to go in, put that in, take the apple pie when the blueberry pie needs to be turned down to 350, then we'll finish the blueberry pie by itself, and then we'll move on to our bread at the very end. So as you can see, there's a lot of liquid in these apples after all that sugar and salt drained them all. So what you're gonna do is just scoop them all out, just like so. Make sure you get all of that juice. Just let this drain while we weigh out everything else. So we're going to need 40 grams butter, why make dishes when you don't have to? Just use the paper, put that off to the side. We need to zest the entire lemon, so we'll zest it back into this bowl so that it doesn't go in here. Just the zest, we don't want the rind. The rind's bitter and makes it taste bad. So just get the top layer. That's where all the oils are. And then instead of using water for our slurry, we're gonna use lemon juice. So this recipe uses 1 full lemon. Oh, that's my lemon squares. Now that that's done, you can continue on. And there you go. That's all you need. Bunch of lemon zest. Then we need to cut this and squeeze it. So, squeeze it out. Make sure you zest it first because it's almost impossible to zest it afterwards. You can do it, but it's a real pain and not fun at all. So make sure you do it ahead of time. Then, make sure to get your seeds out. You don't want to be eating those. In your bakery, what you'll probably do is you'll probably have a squeezer that will stop the seeds getting in. Or if you're doing this by hand still at your bakery, what you'll end up doing is just straining the juice off, and that will collect all the seeds when you do huge batches. So we're gonna have this in our bowl. We're gonna mix it with our cornstarch. So instead of making this not drier but more bland by putting water in, we can just use that same lemon and we don't waste anything. There's our slurry set up. Okay, so we're gonna put in our nutmeg and our cinnamon. Then we're gonna heat this up. Once this starts boiling, we'll add in our slurry. Keep stirring till it's nice and thick and boils again to get rid of that starchy taste. Then we'll take it off heat, add in our butter, slowly mix that in. That gives it a nice shine. And we'll put that back into our apples. Starting to boil now, so let's add in our slurry. Make sure it all gets in there. And then just keep stirring. It'll start thickening up. It needs to boil one more time. If it doesn't boil, you'll get this starchy taste. It's not very pleasant, so just make sure that it gets back to a boil. It's gonna look runny at first, but you'll soon see that it thickens up real quick. Now you can see that it's very thick, it's boiling, all that flavor is in there, and that starch flavor is out. Now that that's all done, just making sure that it's fully cooked out, that starch. We'll turn this off, put this off to the side, and add in your butter. Slowly just mix this in, just like this, until it's all mixed in. This will cool it down and give it a nice shine. If you put the butter in right away or while it's on the heat, the shine will disappear and you wasted putting butter in there in the first place. Okay, so now we just pour this back in. All of it, make sure. Get all that nice sauce in there. And we'll do the same for the blueberries. Mix it up before you continue on. Make sure all the flavors in all of the apples. And then we'll move on to the blueberries, do the exact same thing. Then we're gonna have to wait till the meat pies are out, turn up the heat, put the apple pie in, and so on and so forth. But in the meantime, we'll do the blueberry and we can start punching down our sourdough and let it proof one last time. Just like before, we're going to put our blueberries to strain. Make sure you get all that liquid out of here. You want to use all of that in your sauce. Do the same thing where we zest our lemon into here and then squeeze it for the lemon juice for our slurry. There we go. That's all we need. We'll cut this in half and squeeze it. So we're just going to cut it in half, squeeze it, use this for our slurry, just like we did for the apples. If you're doing large batches, like I said earlier, and you're doing it still by hand, you can strain off the seeds so that you don't have to pick through them. That way you know for sure there's no seeds. You do lose some of the pulp, which has some flavor, but in large batches it's way more important to make sure there's no seeds in there. So we put in our bit of cinnamon. We'll turn this on. A little bit of cinnamon and a little bit of allspice. Now, while this heats up, I'm going to weigh out my cornstarch and my butter. A little bit more cornstarch in this recipe, whoa, but there's a little less butter in it. So you want this one to be more thick because the pieces of blueberry are a lot smaller than your apples, and your apples will hold your pie together. The blueberries won't because there's not enough weight to them, and you need that thicker sauce to hold itself better. Let me just clean this up. Weigh out the butter. That's enough. While this boils, make sure your slurry is nice and mixed. It's hard to use a slurry that's sat for a while because the cornstarch will separate. So make sure you're constantly stirring this rather than that. Nothing's gonna happen to this. You don't need to worry about it. You do need to do like one or two just like this, just to make sure that all the spices are mixed. But other than that, make sure you're mixing your cornstarch. Starting to boil. So let's put our slurry in. Make sure all of it's in there. Keep stirring. As it heats up, it'll thicken. We'll add in our butter at the very end once it's turned off heat, and back into our blueberries. Then both fillings are ready to go, and all we're waiting for is oven. The sourdough's basically done proofing the first time, so I'll punch it down, put it into the basket, and we'll be waiting for that one as well. Okay, so it's nice and thick. It's hard to see because it's blueberries, but I'll pour some for you. It's nice and thick. We'll take that off the heat. Now that the starch is cooked out of it, take it off the heat, keep stirring it a little bit, and throw your butter in. Slowly just mix your butter in until it's all melted. Pour it back in your blueberries and we're done. You'll also notice that there's a bit of liquid from the blueberries. That's the other thing with the blueberries that are different from the apples, is they keep losing liquids where the apples will kind of stop. And when that happens, you're gonna need a thicker sauce. So that is the other reason why we put more cornstarch in our blueberry versus our apple recipe. Make sure all of it gets in there. Mix this up nicely. You can let this sit, cool down. That'll thicken it up even more and make it easier to work with when we are putting our lattice on. So we'll put this off to the side. Then we're going to finish our bread. Okay, so here's our sourdough. Just gonna punch it down using a bit of flour to be able to work with it. Remember, just like last time, sourdoughs are a bit flatter than normal doughs because you're not using normal yeast. So I like to bring it out, pop them like this before I put it back into my basket. But that's all it takes, 2 seconds. Knead it back into shape. There's still a little bit of flour in there, so I'll use that. Just like so. That's the top, so make sure it's facing downwards. Cover it and let it sit for 2 hours, depending on how hot everything is. Those other pies are about to come out. The oven will heat up super quickly, so I'm gonna start rolling out our pie, our apple one to be specific. Once I get this done and in, I'll take out the meat pies and we'll be on our way. Okay, so we've rolled it out now. Should be good now. Just a little bit longer and we'll roll it onto our rolling pin. Remember, start halfway so that this tin doesn't move, because you can always pull back slightly to get it back. Push on the inside, make sure it's nice and tight to all the walls. Then we'll cut. There we go. Leave this off to the side for the top. We'll grab the apple, pour it on. There we go. I'm noticing there's a little bit extra liquid, so I'm not going to put all the liquid in. Move your stuff around so that It's a nice circle top. Move the liquid to wherever you need the liquid. There we go. Move this over. Let's start on this. The apple pie is a bit bigger than all the other pies, but that's all okay. I might reduce it by 50 grams or so, so half an apple or less. We'll see. But we'll see how this one turns out before I decide what I'm gonna change. There we go. Now we have the top. Cover the pie. Cut off any extra we need. Especially for this pie, make sure it's nicely closed or it will leak out. You're already seeing it come out a bit. Okay, so now crimp it. Make sure you're crimping it nicely so that all of it's sealed and it's not going to spray out. There's a lot of air in here I can feel. So I'm going to actually cut my star right now. Once we're done egg washing, we'll throw her in. And we'll be fully ready for the blueberry in about 10 minutes, which gives me a perfect amount of time to do the dough and get that done. Make sure your crimp's nice. Don't just rush it in. There we go, apple pie done. Last pie, blueberry. Just gonna get this done quickly. We're almost time to get the apple pie out and put the blueberry in at 400, and then after 12 minutes we'll turn it down to 350 for the rest of the time. So let's just roll this out real quick. Okay, so nice and rolled out. Let's put it down. Get it nicely placed in. There we are. Move these together. Pour our blueberries in. Spread it out nicely. Remember, once the lattice goes on, it's got blueberry stuff on it, so you gotta be very careful when you fully put the lattice on. Okay, so we've cut our lattice now, and we have our pie. I'm gonna try going with a thicker lattice. Remember, the dough needs to be thin, but depending on what you want, you can go with big strips or little strips. Just be very careful, because you're going to need to crisscross each one. So we start like this, pull it over, go here, let this one come over, pull this through a bit more, just like that. Lift this one up, go, we continue. And now, be very careful when you do this so that none of this touches anything else. Then you just continue through, put these ones back, the next ones, and then the last ones. Cut the extra lettuce off. then you crimp it like normal. Okay, so now that you've crimped it and everything, go ahead and just egg wash it. Once you're done egg washing, we're going to throw it into the oven. And as soon as the apple pie comes out, we turn down the heat on this, making sure that it doesn't stay on too hot. 350. Okay, so let's put this in and then take the apple pie out, start on our bread after that. Okay, time to pull out the pie. Whoa! Bit of leakage coming out of this one, so we're probably going to reduce the apple so that doesn't happen again. Now let's return the bake to 350 for the rest of the time for the blueberry. Yeah, probably about 100 grams of apples I'll take out of it. That way it doesn't mess up the crimp and it won't leak out next time. Everything will taste fine, it's just gonna not look as pretty. Okay, so now that this is finally proofed, I've turned up the oven to 450. Oh, come on. Might have not done enough flour. Oh, perfect. Still comes out. Now, I'm gonna try the X pattern. I'm gonna cut it all the way. Or should I just keep it like that? You know, I'm gonna try this first. And then next time I'll try the X. So we're just gonna throw this in and be done. Okay, so while that bread bakes, I'm going to finish the lemon squares. All I have to do is cut. Clean off the edges. Just like last time, I can use these to taste test and to give away to samples. Now, the bush is only getting 12 of these, just like last time. So those extra 4 are going to be used to give away to people around me that can give me some feedback. Different people from last time. So, be very careful. Use a ruler if you think you can't cut straight. Or the right size. Make it easier for you. Move it so that you can cut it straight. There we are. All done that. Once we take the bread out, I'll make everything lie out so we can talk about it for a second. And then we'll be done today. So, it's still exploded out the side. Sounds good though. Looks nice, but a little bad on the outside. I'm probably gonna need to knead it a bit more. For maybe a bit longer. But other than that, everything's good. Once everything cools down, I'll put everything out and we'll talk about it for a second before I take my picture. This is all I made today. Had a few issues with the 2 pies. A little bit too much apples in the apple pie, so I will change that. And with the blueberry pie, I think I need to make the crimp a little bit bigger so that's higher on the edges and the blueberries don't seep out. There wasn't a lot of leakage on the blueberries, so I know it's not too many blueberries. It's just that the outside edge wasn't high enough. So I'll fix that with that one and this one. Again, with our attempt, cut looks nice, but it exploded off the side, so I'll have to keep working on it. But everything else today turned out really good. I know these will taste good, so the recipes are good, just need to have some more practice with them. So this is how they turned out. I will be changing that apple pie recipe to be 100 grams less apples. I won't change the sugar or anything. I'm finding that a lot of people are saying that it's a bit too sour, so I'll keep the same amount of sugar to counteract that a little bit. I realized with the blueberry pie, I need to have double the amount of dough that I normally leave for lattice, or not for lattice, for the crimp, because normally what happens is I have the top layer and the bottom layer for a crimp, where this time I just had the bottom layer. So I'm gonna double it so I can fold it over so then it becomes double like a normal pie. We're still working on that sourdough. Sooner or later we'll get it. And of course the lemon square is perfectly fine. If you've liked this video, please like and subscribe. You can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. I even have my own website. Thank you, and have a nice day.